Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Roast into Ceilings podcast. Now, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, so we thought we'd talk a little bit about the connection between mental health and feminism.
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic because feminism itself has been around for I'd say a while now, but again, it hasn't always. And back before we kind of started bringing awareness to these issues, women's mental health was basically nothing, right? It wasn't there. It wasn't. No one ever talked about it. And before people really started talking about women's mental health, everything that women went through, all the struggles women had struggles with, it was under one title, which was hysteria. Now, if you hear hysteria now, you probably think of it as like a oh my god, like I'm so hysteric, like oh this is making me like hysterical. But back in like a historical context, if you're a woman and you're having a mental health condition, if you were having any type of even physical condition sometimes, even if you were just having a really down day, if you're just going through a really tough spot, you were hysteric. Even if these issues had like a lot of like a deeper root, something that actually needed to be fixed, it didn't matter. You were just hysteric because women's mental health wasn't really a thing. So today we're really going to talk about that and how far we progress, and also where we can still progress.
Yeah, definitely the medical world has changed so much since back then, and I could not imagine living as a woman during that time and having a mental health issue and you not having the awareness of what was happening to you either and being told you were hysteric. I read that in the 18th and 19th century, the treatments for it included sexual intercourse, abstinence, perfume, and even hysterectomies, which is absolutely terrible and does nothing to help anybody's long-term mental or physical health.
I feel like intercourse and abstinence might be very different things because again, hysteria was so it was such a like a broad term. This was everything, and that's why all these quote unquote treatments are so different because this wasn't one issue. This wasn't just hysteria. This was the things that people are dealing with now. This is anxiety. This is depression. This is schizophrenia. This is bipolar disorder. These are all these things. But back then, it was just what a hysterical woman, right? And they used perfume to treat it. So we've definitely come far from that, which is, you can't even imagine. Like Isabella mentioned this is 18th and 19th century, right? Whenever you think of like these old outdated medical procedures, you think like, oh, people in like the 1600s, they were like breaking your skull and like letting your blood out to like get rid of the evil spirits. Wow, humans were so crazy back then. Back then wasn't that long. I think the United States were like around during this. I think a lot of modern history was happening during this time, where they're still telling women, "Oh, you're kind of hysteric. You should go put some perfume on."
I think it is a testament to human advancement that we're able to make these discoveries. I think that's a really amazing thing. But definitely being a doctor at that time, or being a woman at that time, or just being anybody who needed medical care at that time must have been so crazy to be given these treatments that you think has some type of evidence to back it up, but no, it doesn't.
And I think I read that too. That hysteria is kind of seen as like the first quote unquote woman's mental health disorder because this is almost primarily used to diagnose like women who are seen as crazy and irrational. And a lot of people now are gonna look back on this and criticize it, saying like, of course this seems really stupid looking back at it, but it's kind of still seen now. Sometimes in the present day, even people kind of brush things off, like oh like even when you hear like oh they're just a girl, it's on like that time of the month. Oh, they're just being like a girl. They're being like irrational. They're being emotional. J.R. Thorpe writes for Bushel, I got this quote, that tearing every woman with a mental illness with the crazy brush or just lumping us in with any person of the female persuasion who's perceived to act irrationally, which is in a way you don't like, is archaic and silly. Just kind of bring this back to this idea of how old this concept of hysteria is, but kind of how this treatment of that is still present today. I think it's pretty important to think about because while we think of hysteria as oh that's so old and like old people were so stupid, like the way the kind of like generalization of women's mental health is definitely still seen today.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right about that. There's still definitely echoes of it today, and there's still mental health stigma around, like a lot of stigma around disorders like depression or anxiety, especially when it comes to being a woman with these disorders. So I like that you brought that up for sure.
And I think For sure, and I think another one of the main points too is kind of lumping. The writer wrote that this kind of idea of lumping all women with mental health struggles together, because again, not one woman is gonna be the same as another woman. There's so many layers. We talked about this in an episode. There's so many layers to everyone's personal experience, and just because you're a woman and you have a mental health struggle does not mean you're gonna be the same as another woman with another mental health struggle. It's kind of defining everyone as like women with mental health struggle is it's not far off from going back to what these people were saying about hysteria.
I do like that today we have a lot more like women's mental health groups and counseling support specifically for women or women and children because there is this recognizing piece to it that women might struggle with mental health differently than a man might and that there might be different symptoms involved just like when we talked about the diagnosing, right? So I do like that there's kind of this piece of okay, it's going to be different for every single person and we need a support for every person individually to help them improve over time.
For sure. I think the idea of just kind of like centralizing women's mental health too has been really important. Not we're not saying men's mental health is not important, right? We're just put that out there. Again, feminism definitely includes men. It's just the fact that women's mental health for a long time has been stigmatized. Anyone's mental health really, but especially with women, this kind of idea of in the medical field where it's been like the effects of hysteria has definitely like taken a toll on how women's mental health is treated even to the present day. So like seeing those things like support groups and counseling specifically towards women is really nice to see, just to kind of show people that women's mental health is definitely like a thing people should take seriously too. It's not just like, oh, that woman's just really crazy and just like being a girl. No, like there are a lot of statistics to back up how prevalent women's mental health struggles are, and I have a few of those that I could talk about from the internet, where out of 300 million people who live with depression worldwide, women are twice as likely to experience depression than men. And women are also more likely to have PTSD than men. And the reasoning behind this was like really heartbreaking to me. It's because rape is actually the leading cause of PTSD. When I read that, I was really shocked because usually when you hear PTSD, you still have like the image from the movies, where it's like a soldier who's like shell shocked coming home from war, and you're like, oh, like that's kind of the idea of PTSD that the media portrays. But reading that rape is the leading cause is so heartbreaking. And then if you take it from that lens, it also makes sense because here it says 90% of adult victims of rape are female. So that makes sense why women are more likely to have PTSD. But again, that's just a very unknown fact based on how stigmatized PTSD is. So that just isn't, I feel like, isn't as known as some other statistics are.
Yeah, that is absolutely so terrible and like depressing to hear. And there definitely is this stigma around women's health, like you were saying. And looking at the numbers, it's terrible that there is. There's a lot of women are over emotional, which I think maybe grows from the hysteria piece of it, or how often women might struggle with mental health from those statistics. So women are too emotional. Women are experiencing emotions because of their reproductive system, while there are independent mental health issues as well. But also do like that you mentioned men's mental health has its unique struggles as well. Like men are oftentimes discouraged to talk about their mental health, and feminism includes that too. It includes talking about how mental health affects people individually. Like the LGBTQ community is going to experience mental health differently than maybe a person with a disability. So it's definitely a wide spectrum, and it's important to recognize, how it affects every person. So.
No, for sure. I know a topic, especially during mental health month now, that needs a lot more awareness is men's mental health. And a lot of people will think that feminism and even just bringing attention to women's mental health is kind of excluding that, but again, that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to be the most inclusive we can on this podcast. And there's been the idea of women's mental health is kind of more of the idea of opening this dialogue, opening this very like open interaction between people who can talk about their mental health openly and being able to bring this attention to the media, talk about it more openly, deleting, like getting rid of that stigma. That's going to be beneficial to men's mental health too, because I know the main thing with men's mental health is men will experience these things just as much as women. Like women, I think, are 3 times more likely to attempt suicide than men. Men are 4 times more likely to succeed in suicide. But some of these things are less talked about because of like toxic masculinity, which we've talked about, and all these concepts. That men are less likely to speak out about it because of all these stigmas. But if we can use feminism to open this conversation, that's going to be great for everyone.
Yeah, I really like that focus that you brought up because mental health is definitely just how it is. It's so personal. It's so difficult to talk about it, right? Because you're being vulnerable. You're opening yourself up
For sure.
to attacks or to feeling not validated. So it's definitely a difficult thing to talk about. And being able to talk about maybe the stereotypes that it has on certain people, it kind of brings people to light and saying, okay, so we can talk about this as individuals. We can talk about the struggles that we have with each other, no matter how different we might be. So I really love that.
And I think another thing that does add a lot of stigma, I'd say towards men in general, is how many like mental health disorders now are seen as like almost feminine in a way, like eating disorders. Eating disorders are very, very female heavy and like very prevalent, especially in like teenage girl demographics, and even like just like anorexia and bulimia are just very common, and it's been on the rise in every generation. And while it is primarily women who suffer from this condition, a lot of men have it too. Like the numbers aren't small, but because of these stigmas, even that, and even like anxiety in general, or even like depression, has almost been stigmatized into being too feminine or too like girly, and that's closed off a lot of the conversation for men to be able to be open about it too, which I think really sucks because there's nothing inherently feminine about being depressed or being anxious or having an eating disorder. I don't know where that came from. Probably the hysteria bit. I don't know, but that actually makes a lot of sense. But it shouldn't. So if we are able to like almost regender, redefine our perception of gender in mental health, that I think I can take us pretty far.
I like that you talked about the teenage age, especially because that's where we're at, and that's where a lot of our viewers at, or where they're heading in the future. And there's definitely a lot of dangers now for teenage girls, and the mental health struggle for teenage girls has gotten the numbers have been a lot higher recently, and it's because of things like online presence, for example, cyberbullying, or the expectations that social media puts on us at a young age. And that's definitely something that we need to be aware of and that we need to educate about, because it's so easy to fall into this trap of, oh, she's prettier than me, or I need to shave my legs, or I won't be considered beautiful. And all of these things are around us every day, especially with our online presence. So that's definitely a big contributor to mental health issues.
And these thoughts have become so normalized of almost like, it's almost, okay, here's my take. It's become so normal to be like, oh, I hate the way I look. Like, oh, I don't like this, I don't like that. Like, this is so, like, you feel like everyone does this to themselves, where if people see someone who's very confident and they're like, oh, I do like myself. Like, I like how I look. I like how my body looks. I don't feel like it's almost seen as egotistical because of how normalized self-hatred is. I think that's pretty crazy, because that just goes to show how much people are self-conscious, how much people are experiencing these thoughts and think that's normal. It's not. Like, this is not, you're not supposed to feel this way. This is all, again, a social construct. It really is. Like, I know this term social construct gets thrown around, but, like, I use the example all the time. The cavemen did not care about how hairy their legs were. And it wasn't normal to care about it back then. And now it is. And it's just really confusing, because honestly, like, it's negatively affecting everyone. There's nobody who benefits from saying, aside from like razor companies, so that's a different topic, but there's no one who benefits from you hating how your legs look, or everyone hating from it. Like, there's really no benefit, and this shouldn't be seen as normal. You should be getting help for these things.
Yeah, there is definitely this big industry that exploits insecurities, especially the insecurities of teenage girls. So every girl needs to be educated about that so they don't get exploited, because it's a very vulnerable time for adult women too, but for teenage girls especially, is when you're growing, and it's when you believe everything anybody says to you. So it's definitely something we need to talk about, open the dialogue about, and like you said, be proud of how we look, be proud of who we are, because that's such a difficult thing to do as well at the same.
For sure. I think it's also a bit of media literacy too, like you mentioned. Like don't believe you need to change something about yourself because someone on the internet said to. They're probably getting paid for it. They're the ones benefiting. You will not benefit from that. You're gonna go down a rabbit hole and it's gonna suck. I think everyone should choose their peace, recognize that taking care of your mental health is important, and also like not be afraid to reach out and be like, hey, I'm experiencing this stuff. I don't think it's normal. Can you help me? I think that should be normalized.
And all of our viewers are so beautiful. I just want to say.
You are. We can see your profile pictures. We'll see if anyone listening is struggling with your mental health. There's so many resources. There's a lot that are like location based, I think. So if you just want to like Google it, it'll give you the best resources that are local to you too. If you need help finding some, our DMs are open as well, like always. So reach out.
Thank you guys.